It's time. It
Okay.
is the top of the hour. Happy 2026. Yay. Welcome to the new year. It is going to be a great year. Do you all have words for the year? I think Rob and I have the same word. We stole each other's words. Mine is focus. I need to focus. Does anybody else feel spread thin?
Always. This.
The new year is the time for focus. What is yours, Sean? Do you have a word for the year? Do you have a theme for your year?
I think it's the theme I start with every year of control what I can and let the rest go. And then so far it's been okay.
Yeah, this is the reason why I have to keep people like Sean around me who are just cool, calm, collected, positive. Please send me some of your energy. And Brian, who's just very, everything's great. It's going to be great. You need to find those people in your life right now. That, if you're like me, you have to find those people that are calm and focused. Let's help you with yours. Okay, as folks are joining, I wanted to welcome you all to our January Build Capable exclusive, where today we will be talking about everyone's favorite topic in the training world and in the not training world, actually, compliance. And we decided to kick off with this very exciting topic for 2026 because we got a lot of questions last year, Rob. We got a lot of questions about how do you make sure that in your organization, if you're delivering e-learning online training, how do you make sure that you stay compliant? Because in many, if not most organizations, the only reason why they do have an LMS or a learning management system or a learning platform is for compliance purposes. That tends to be the number one reason why folks have these learning platforms, is to be able to track that training was done. And so it's a valid question, especially when you talk about a tool like XCL that allows you to package content, deliver it to as many people as you want, track everything that happens. Can we use that for compliance purposes? Would it suit our needs? So I thought today what we would do is go over some of the main things that are requirements that make training legally defensible, and invite some guests here today to tell us a little bit about their experience. And spoiler alert, both Brian Dusablon and Sean Putman both have done work with Build Capable over the years, back when we were Learning Ninjas and were some of the founders, or the founders. Brian was the founder of Learning Ninjas before Build Capable ever started. So I've had the great pleasure of working with these folks for a very long time. But since the Learning Ninjas days, both Brian and Sean have been working with lots of other organizations firsthand, have some experiences both from past careers and also more recent years of some of their experience in working in this ecosystem, this learning ecosystem that we have in many organizations. I've also invited some other guests to join us today. So we do have some other folks here on the Zoom call. And I know that there are individuals on LinkedIn joining us live. So feel free to ask questions, drop your comments, and we'll see how much we can cover in the next 30 minutes. So with that being said, let's kick this off. What do you say? What I have to say first, as a legal disclaimer, I am absolutely not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. I cannot give you legal advice. What I can do is tell you that there are 5 requirements that tend to be the requirements that make training legally defensible, specifically online training. And because I have this training background, I have crafted this beautiful slide for you to talk through these 5 points today and share them with all of you. And on this slide that I'm sharing now, I've got those 5 characteristics of making online training legally defensible. And here are the 5. So the first one is who completed the training. Second is what training did they complete? So what content was it? What version was it? 3 is when did they complete it? So time. 4 is a really interesting one. It's that they actually completed it, not just clicked through it. And that's a big one. And then number 5 is that your records are reliable and tamper resistant. So those are the 5 characteristics of legally defensible online training. So what I thought we might do is talk a little bit first about how Build Capable XCL addresses these, because we work different than an LMS, right, Rob? It's a different setup than what you're used to. So typically what we see in the learning ecosystems is that the organization will invest in an LMS, a learning management system, or some kind of learning platform. Usually they'll try to hook it up in some way to their HR system so that all the employees are loaded in the LMS also, or they might do that process manually. And then you would assign training to folks, usually on a cadence for their annual training, their onboarding that's required, things like that, which is fine. And then that training gets assigned. Usually we end up going around and saying, why haven't you finished your training? And we run reports. And that's the typical cadence for compliance training in most organizations, in my experience. And hopefully your experience isn't that, but that is often what we find in companies. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about how XCL handles that. So, Rob, this is your time to shine since this is your baby from a technical perspective. So, tell us with number 1, how do we find out in XCL who completed the training? If somebody were to deliver online compliance training with an XCL link or QR code, how do I know who completed it?
So there's really one way. Every record, every statement that's made about a piece of content that XCL captures is in XAPI. So there's one source where you can go, and any piece of content that's within XCL that you have a link for, all that data is stored in one place. So that is a convenience and not a requirement, but each one of those statements comprises an actor. That actor is the who. And that is generally accomplished in a couple of ways. One, we can set up a form where you enter your name, you enter your email address. Later on in this list, we're probably going to find out that might not be strong enough, but XCL does also allow you to include SSO. So you can gate your content behind a secure signing authority that's maybe within your corporation, or even just that's within any other sort of enterprise like Google, for example. That will pull real user names, real email addresses into the record, and that's replicated for each record. So every single thing that they do is always stamped with this same authentication information. And that information is definitely usable for who completed the training. Now you can search across all your records and all the records for a particular link, a particular version of that link. You can see who did what. And that kind of completes and satisfies that first and overarching attribute of legally defensible training.
That leads into the second part, right? Because the way that XCL collects data, it collects that data in a who, what, and when format, and what they did specifically. And it tracks it with every interaction that they have. It's tracking those interactions as they go in real time. So you're also seeing timestamps precisely as they move through that training. I wanted to ask you, Rob, how do we know what training they completed? What specifically they completed for number 2?
Again, two ways. We know the link that they used, but within that link, there might be multiple pieces to that training. When statements are generated at each part within a piece of content, we know exactly what they laid eyes on. We know what questions they answered within a training module. We know the answers that they gave. We know whether they were correct or incorrect. We know how many times they went through and retried questions or retried entire quizzes or retried entire training. Again, as you were saying, it's who did what, when, and with a bunch of attributes. And we collect a lot of attributes about what was going on. When it comes to non-training module specific stuff, we still have insight. If it's a video, we know how long you watched that video for, how many times you paused it, stopped it, how many times you skipped ahead, what speed you watched it at. If you muted it, we know we can get that information to prepare ourselves for a future where maybe someone didn't actually watch a video. Although they have a completed statement, they got to the end, they may have skipped over a bunch of stuff, and we know what parts they skipped over. So those are the kinds of things that we can do with XCL or with any kind of rich data set that gives us accuracy onto what was actually exposed.
So what I'm
Um,
hearing you say is that to get a really strong compliance record, there's really only maybe two things you need to do in XCL. You would want to connect to some kind of single sign-on in your organization, because then you would have that authentication layer of who it was. Even though that's not technically required, it does make it stronger because it means that they've logged into something, but it's not required. It's just something that might strengthen that compliance case, if you will. So, who completed the training, what they completed would be your details in your link. When they completed it, all those things get time stamped, not just completion, but to your point, Rob, everything they did along the way. That they actually completed it. This is one where XCL actually beats out pretty much every LMS. And unless it's a learning platform that supports XAPI content, number 4, that they actually completed it, just didn't click through. XCL allows you to track that as they go along. So I know what they did at a far more detailed level than somebody who's delivering SCORM 1.2 content in their learning management system. And then the last one about records being reliable and tamper resistant. Could you maybe speak to that a little bit, Rob?
yeah, I can. So essentially with XAPI, we store all our data in an LRS. An LRS has an API in the front of it that basically allows us to save records in a lot of different ways and query records. But there is actually no way to change those records. Once they're in there, unless you pull the records out or unless you, as an administrator, go in and delete a bunch of records, which is usually an all or nothing kind of scenario or a time framed scenario. Outside of that, XCL does not give you administrative access to your LRS. So in this case, anything that comes in has data points to it. All that data gets stored, and really there's no automated method for which it could be tampered with. There's no way that an individual could get in anywhere within the system, the platform, or even the underlying technology and change a record. So tamper resistant, absolutely. Your records are safe, your data is safe, and it's unchangeable. Once it's written, once the statement's been made, it's out there to be queried and used in whatever way, aggregated in whatever way you need.
Perfect. It's like when we built this tool, we knew a little bit about what we were doing, just a little bit. Okay, so I want to actually switch my sharing over to XCL for a moment, and I'll talk through as I show this what I'm demoing. So I'm going to switch over to XCL and show you a couple of new things. And there's actually another release that is rolling out in the next few days that is going to add even more features to this. So I'll talk through some of that. Okay, in XCL on the analytics dashboard, there are actually two analytics sections in XCL, the dashboard and the activity stream. I actually want to start with the dashboard today. Usually what I tell people is not all that impressive, but from a compliance perspective, I love it because it makes compliance very easy. You can, on the XCL Analytics dashboard, select the links that you want to view data for, view the analytics for, and it creates little charts for each link that you select. Once you've selected the links that you want to include in your dashboard, then you can go in and you can quickly view a completion report. And on this report, it will show you how many people launched it and how many people passed it or completed it, depending on what type of content it is. Sometimes you'll get completion, like with a video, for example. And sometimes you might get passed if it's e-learning with a passing score or something like that. So I'm going to show you one example of a quick report that you can access from here. I can go into a specific link's dashboard chart and view the user completion for that content, for that link. So this is a real course, LearnX API. It's one of our courses that we made free back in December. So we had several people go through this. This is actually not everyone. I had to switch our LRS halfway through because I wanted to show it here in XCL. So what I'm going to do is pull up a user completion just for the first module, the introduction module. And what you'll be able to see when this opens is the person's name, their email address if it's required. In LearnX API, we don't require the email address, so it's not shown here. If there was a user ID that you were using in XCL, that would show up in this report. Again, for this course, we didn't. You've got how many people launched it, so their launch status, and then you have whether they completed or passed it. For this particular course, there was just a passing piece of data based on a quiz that was inside of this module. And you've got either completion or pass date, depending on what data is being sent by that content. And so I can quickly review this and see, do I have passing for certain people? I can also download that as a CSV. So I immediately have my completion report. Super, super easy. Now, if I wanted to dig into the data for a specific person and see what they did, then I could head over to the activity stream in the analytics section. This is that LRS or learning record store area that Rob was talking about. It lets us view all of the data, and I could filter it down by a person. I could add in what information like date range or something like that, or the specific link name or course that I wanted to view the data for, and I could see everything that person did and download that as a CSV report for that person's activity. So not only can you get quick access to compliance reports and data here, but you can drill much further down into their activities. So that's at a high level how XCL is handling compliance types of data or data in general. What I'd like to do now is talk to Brian and Sean, and maybe even I know Susan is joining us from Midmark here on the call as well, who's an XCL user in her organization. Maybe we'll get a couple of comments to see what has been your experience so far. And Brian, why don't we start with you? Talk to us a little bit about compliance. What were some of the challenges that you've experienced?
Sure. I think that the one we all experience is that it's just clunky in an LMS. You have to publish stuff and you're not going to get a lot of data. You don't know whether people, like I used to create the locked in 2-hour minimum, things like that to work around whether people were engaged in the content. But the most recent example, I think, was we had the biggest issue is if you have external audiences or a mix of audiences within your organization that you're trying to get compliance with. And in a healthcare org I was working with, they had external partners that also had to be compliant within their standards. So they had to have a report to all their partner doctors, and they didn't have enough seats in the LMS to run that through. So we used 7taps, which I really like 7taps for being able to distribute quick content, links, and surveys and different things. And microlearning, small refreshers, things like that, it's really good for. It's not great for what was a 1-hour compliance course, but it was the only tool that we had to be able to actually get enough reasonable data. And I don't even know if that was defensible data because of the who completed it, and we didn't have a lot of access to that. So what we did is we basically compressed pretty complex compliance course into whatever the maximum slides or cards were in 7taps and distributed it that way. The problem on the reporting side was that we had people using the direct link and people accepting the invitation. So we had a big mess of data on the back end. And we had completions, like they went through all the cards, but we didn't have any other data. We didn't have any progressive data. And so XCL would have been awesome. I wish I had it because we could have done a more useful learning experience for folks and gotten better data out of it and had a live view. So I didn't have to run a daily report and then run a bunch of hacks in Excel to highlight who had not completed it. And just there's all these things that I had to do manually that I wouldn't have had to do in a XCL. So that's one use case, especially if you're working with external folks that you need to get compliant. And I have a lot of nonprofit clients that will use XCL because they have compliance for volunteers, and we want that data.
I think that's a really great example of what we often will experience in our field, where we'll get a set number of tools that somebody invested in, probably didn't even talk to us about it. And then you have to find a way to force everything you need to do through these 1 or 2 tools that you have access to, which is extremely challenging. And I think that what I like about what we've done with XCL is we've made it very versatile. So you can use it with other tools and systems. It's relatively inexpensive compared to everything else on the market. And it allows you to plug and play where you need it so that you can build that capability and fill in those gaps. Sean, I wanted to send it over to you to tell us a little bit about your experience.
Yeah. I mean, I've had the opportunity to work in a lot of LMSs over the years. And I think some of the bigger things that we see, to Brian's point, just the extensibility to external people with an LMS is difficult at best and expensive. The other side of it, though, is when you start to talk about some video-based stuff. We've done some projects around videos that was video-based compliance training, and being able to see who watched what, where, when, for how long was impossible, or the content was built in a way that it was just, you have to watch the whole video or your navigation's locked down, which obviously doesn't allow for good accessibility on that. In that case, with looking at something like XCL, we get to that more granular data of, okay, we can see how long someone watched a video for. We don't have to just lock them down into not being able to navigate. The other thing I see with a lot of reporting in LMSs, and I'll be honest, with the organizations that I've worked with, I don't know that it's even known that completion is not enough, because the completion report is somebody completed something. It's very difficult to see how long they actually spent in it. And I see it all the time. A 15-minute course is done in 10 seconds because it was just clicked right through. And like, that totally is not legally defensible, I'm sure. Again, not a lawyer, don't play one on TV, but I'm pretty sure that you're probably not going to be able to go into court and say, oh yeah, they took it and they got what they needed to out of it. And then to the last point you had on your slide, if you know the LMS admin, hey, could you go mark this complete for me? And now your data is completely off the rails because they didn't do anything. You show a completion. And again, I'm sure that's probably not going to hold up in court if you were to go.
I didn't even think about that, Sean, but in XCL, you can't go mark somebody.
Right.
They have to have actually done it because it is literally it's a tool. It's not a learning platform. We're not loading people's accounts. They're not creating accounts. You're just seeing what they're actually doing. And it's why I fell in love with XAPI back 10 years ago plus, was that I could finally see what was happening. So someone could come to me and they can say whatever they want, but I can see what's happening in real time. And so it's really interesting to think about that use case as compared to an LMS. You might think that you're getting the data, but unless you're locking people into screens and forcing them to sit there and wait until something is read to them, which, by the way, doesn't prove anything. We know that in the learning field, and it's a terrible user experience. But you're not going to be able to show time spent or anything like that. So you're going to have a hard time with that. All right, Susan, thanks for joining us today. I want to turn this over to you because you've been using XCL for what, maybe 6 to 8 months now?
No, 3.
Oh, 3. That's right. Go ahead.
We delayed in getting into it. Yeah, so I am a bit of an anomaly. I don't come from an L&D background. I started in architecture of all things, got into sales, and so I'm using XCL for sales enablement with external partners. We do currently have an LMS that we are desperately trying to get off of. I will say that it's a platform that I inherited. I did not invest in this. I don't endorse it at any level. I think upfront, it's a huge administrative burden, as you were mentioning, to get people set up in the system. There's a whole login process. They've got a registration. Then they have to go find the email, and maybe they know what the platform is called, but probably not. And so they don't even know what they're looking for. So what we're doing with XCL is we've actually embedded it into our Zendesk instance. We have a reference library that's available to all of our external partners. And we've now created learning modules within that. And so what I'm working toward is getting that authentication process through Zendesk. We don't have that right now. We're cheating the system with an iframe setup, and that's a little cumbersome. So on my end, from a compliance perspective, I just went through this in December. People, as they're logging into XCL, we have their email address, but when they put in their company name, they can use an acronym, they can use initials, they can come up with all different ways of identifying themselves. Some person even auto logged in with their Yahoo account. So my data on the back end is a little scrambled in terms of how many people I'm managing and how I can match them back to their company. But I think once we can get that piece cleaned up where it's more aligned with an SSO type of login, I literally send out a link and I just say, go to the learning library. Here's what's required of you. And people can start learning. It holds their spot. And then I can see on the back end exactly what they've accomplished.
And I think this is a really important point to reinforce what Susan mentioned, because they are using you're on the pro account, right? So
Yep.
they're on a Build Pro account, but they do not have SSO implemented yet. And when you don't have single sign-on implemented, you are in a situation where you're having people type in their information. For your organization, that might be great because you might not have single sign-on for external folks. But from a compliance perspective, where you do have folks that have single sign-on to a system, a shared system that everyone has access to or that your target audience has access to, it is extremely valuable to set up SSO. So next steps for Susan's team is setting up that Zendesk SSO. So that way, when someone is accessing their training, they open the link and it just goes to the content and starts tracking everything using their credential. They're already signed into it. So they don't even have a landing page when they access that content. And that is extremely powerful to get content where people already are. I think one of our biggest challenges in all of the clients that I've worked with over the years and all of the roles that I've had in every organization, it's always challenging to get people into another system that they only use every once in a while for maybe compliance or whatever. They're not using this in their day-to-day job. A colleague of mine, a friend of mine, JD Dillon, says you need to put content where people will just trip over it, they'll stumble over it, where they're already working, so that it's not that barrier to access. And from an accessibility perspective, it makes that go far more smooth for anyone who needs to access that content. So whether it's a QR code in physical spaces or a link in places they already are, maybe intranet sites or sales portals or things like that, it gives you the ability to go straight into that content where you already are. So we're almost at time. Any final words from folks on the call today? It goes fast. This 30 minutes goes fast.
I just want to add one quick thing, because I think that another compliance aspect would be if you are observing somebody and you are the auditor or the authenticator of their completion, like in a checklist situation. XCL would work great for that too. And I wish I'd had that in some situations where we were using PDFs or other checklists for observing people's process through an onboarding or through a compliance process. So that's
Such a
just
good
another good use case.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I will tell you that our next exclusive is the last Thursday of February. I will post in the comments for today's event a link to our releases page. Keep a lookout on that page because we push these releases basically every month, if not more often than that, with new features that are coming from you, our XCL users. So if you have a feature or something that you'd like to request, please let us know. We could probably bump that up the list for you if it's something that others have asked for or something that would be really meaningful for you. Until next time, thanks everyone for joining. We'll join you next time on our next exclusive.